Welcome to FlightGlobal Focus, the essential podcast for trusted aviation insight. We publish episodes twice weekly. Join us every Friday for a concise briefing on the week's news, and again on Monday for in-depth analysis covering important developments in airlines, defense, and aerospace. I'm Ryan Finnerty, FlightGlobal's America's Defense reporter, and today we've got a fun show for you. One of the great perks of working as an aviation journalist is that we occasionally get the opportunity to ride in one of the aircraft we spend so much time writing about. And every once in a great while, we're offered a ride in a fast-moving fighter jet, although such chances are increasingly rare. I was recently fortunate enough to get such a chance, and I'll be talking about it today with the rest of the FlightGlobal Defense team, who will share some of their own cockpit experiences. Greg Waldron is our managing editor for Defense, based in Singapore, and Craig Hoyle is our European Defense editor, based in London. Gents, good to speak with you both.
Hi guys, I'm really looking forward to doing this one because it's really rare we get a chance to flex about some of the cooler things we do as reporters.
Hey, great to be here, guys. Just want to congratulate you before you kick off, Ryan, for winning the Best Breaking News submission at the recent Defense Media Awards. And Craig, very impressed that you picked up the Outstanding Achievement Award that night as well. That's some really big kudos, and nice to be in the presence of greatness here.
Thanks very much, Greg. Appreciate that. And you're a multiple award winner yourself, so it's a star-studded cast on today's show.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It was a big surprise for me, and I was very humbled to receive it. Just sort of icing on the cake after 30 years working as a reporter.
Yeah, certainly some nice silverware for the cabinet at home.
So before we get to today's stories from the cockpit, I'm going to take us on a brief trip to Wichita, Kansas, deep in the heartland of North America. That's where I was invited by Textron Aviation Defense to participate in the first public flight of the company's new military trainer jet, the Beechcraft M-346N. It's a warm autumn morning on the tarmac at Beach Field, east of Wichita. The sprawling campus is home to an 8,000-foot runway, aircraft assembly lines, the original Beechcraft Delivery Center, and the headquarters of Textron Aviation's defense unit. Today, it's also home to Textron's newest aircraft, the Beechcraft M-346N. Based on Leonardo's M-346 twin-engine trainer, Textron hopes to sell the M-346N to the U.S. Navy, which is preparing to launch a competition to replace its current T-45 trainers.
3 displays, you got your heads-up display, you got a stick. Notice all the things on the stick are called hands-on throttle and stick. So you don't have to take your hands off the throttle and stick to actuate mission system or certain controls.
Matt Hall is the Director of Sales, Training, and Services at Textron Aviation Defense. He also flew the F-15E for the U.S. Air Force. He's giving me a walk-around of the M-346N ahead of my pre-flight briefing.
This is your oxygen hose, so your main oxygen hose and your emergency oxygen hose. This is your communications cord. And then as you pull more G's, there's a little weight in a valve, and when you pull G's, that weight comes down and the air is allowed to come into your G suit.
So plates are on the legs.
So the plates are on your legs, so it's pretty cool. And it keeps the blood up in your brain. Do you see this little charge on the top? That's an explosive charge.
To blow the canopy.
So this aircraft, the canopy doesn't come off in an ejection. The glass explodes outwards.
Oh, okay. So you go right through the frame of the canopy.
You go right, And that's what, if that somehow failed, that's what these are. These are backups. Just in case. So you can still go through.
Just shatters the glass.
And they test all that, and they go through it all to make sure it's totally safe.
I've been invited to Wichita to ride along on the first public flight of the new M-346N demonstrator in North America. Textron is now touring the twin-engine jet across the United States as the U.S. Navy prepares to launch the undergraduate jet training system competition later this year. And while I'm taking notes on all of the Beechcraft jet's capabilities, I'm most concerned with the one piece of kit I don't want to use, the ejection seat.
They're going to talk to you about the handle. The handle's underneath there. You see a black and yellow. There's a pin. See the pin in right there?
Yep.
They're going to talk about that.
So what is safe to touch when I'm up there?
So
everything that's not black and yellow.
Safe, black and yellow are things you don't want to pull or activate unless you're told to in the process of the briefing, okay?
Okay.
The ejection seat won't go out unless you take that handle right there, take out the pin and go.
Really yank
pull
it. Okay.
But you're not going to do that.
Inside the old Beechcraft delivery center, I meet the Leonardo team who have come from Italy to plan today's flight, including my pilot, Quirino Bucci, or QB as he's known to his colleagues.
The aircraft initially has been designed upon key design targets. Advanced aerodynamics, meaning variable camber wing, vortex lift.
QB flew fighters for the Italian Air Force before joining Leonardo as a test pilot. Today, he'll be showing me what the M-346N can do, both aerodynamically and as a tool for training new pilots. But before we can fly, I have to practice ejection procedures. That's especially important today because the two Martin Baker seats will be set to fire independently from one another if we have to eject.
The two seats are normally sequenced so that they cannot touch during the ejection process. Since you are not experienced as an aircrew, we will have to use the independent mode, which means that we are going to be on our own for ejection. Before you can do this, the safe and arm safety switch, which is the one that is there, has to be in the arm position. Now, anytime that is in the arm position, if you touching the handle which is in the middle, pull it up, then you're gonna go, okay? So you have to take care of it.
After the briefing, we head out to the flight line to practice arming and disarming the ejection seat.
Okay, so now that we have the pin inside, okay? The pin is inside.
So it's safe, yes.
Pin. Then I will remove it for you after the strap in. So this is now is double safe position.
Right, okay.
So I can let you see what is the arm position.
Okay.
Since we have that one. So you have to squeeze this one and go down. Go. Very good. Okay. This is arm position.
Okay.
That the pilot will ask you to have this position before takeoff. And this will allow the ejection to be operated.
Okay.
And then for the egress or at the end of the flight, the pilot will ask you to save.
Make safe.
So you just push it up. You don't have to squeeze it anymore.
Okay.
Safe.
So now it's safe.
Okay?
With that sorted, a Leonardo technician removes the ejection seat's red safety pin located below the center console inside the cockpit. QB then ignites the engines, closes the canopy, and begins our taxi. Yes, I can hear you. Once we hit the taxiway, I arm the ejection seat using the black and yellow lever on the right side of the cockpit. I'm sitting in the rear seat, which comes with a full set of flight controls for an instructor pilot or weapons systems officer. QB rolls us onto the runway, receives takeoff clearance from the tower, and pushes the throttle forward. Over the course of a 1-hour flight, QB demonstrates the embedded tactical trainer system, which allows the M-346N to simulate both air-to-air and air-to-ground combat without needing to install an expensive radar or actually launch physical weapons. He also puts both the jet and me through our paces. We reach an airspeed of 590 knots, or Mach 0.88. We pull up to 5 Gs throughout a series of both tactical and aerobatic maneuvers that include a full inverted loop and multiple barrel rolls. Coming out of one high G turn, QB even uses a laser designator to demonstrate manually guiding a simulated bomb onto a target below, all of which I watch live from a targeting pod video feed in the back seat. The maneuvers complete, we head back to Beach Field for a silky smooth touch and go before settling down for good.
For FlightGlobal, I'm Ryan Finnerty in Wichita, Kansas.
All right, and we're back in the studio now with Greg Waldron and Craig Hoyle. Greg, that was my first flight in a jet, and it was with industry, but you've actually flown with the U.S. Navy. What can you tell us about what your flight was like, and were there any differences between my experience and yours that stood out listening to that?
Yeah, that was a fascinating flight you're on, buddy. I kind of wish I'd been there with you, but, unfortunately, I'm not a qualified fighter pilot. I flew an F-18. I flew in an F-18F, as people have pointed out to me. I didn't fly an F-18. I flew in an F-18F in 2011 at the Langkawi Lima Air Show on the media day. And one of the things that was interesting, and I think you might relate to this too, is it was a U.S. Navy pilot. We were going up and there was a briefing with the safety guys. And I'd say it was about a 1-hour safety briefing, but about 45 minutes of it was about the ejection system. And most of that was basically, they were very concerned that I not activate it inadvertently. And it sounds like on your flight, Ryan, that they were kind of similar, that you don't eject accidentally.
Yeah, that was definitely a major focus of it. And you had mentioned that to me before I went on my trip. I was actually amazed at how much trust they put in me to do the right thing and then not accidentally engage the ejection, as you heard both Matt Hall and QB in that story kind of noted that it's there, and you just don't do it. I wasn't expecting how much I had to do myself in terms of arming the ejection seat, and that there really was a lot of responsibility on me to do those things correctly and then not do something that I shouldn't. And as I think QB was pointed out, I'm not an experienced aircrew. So that was a little bit of a stress point for me, just to not make a mistake. But it was a great window into the experience that pilots and crew have every time they go up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like my pilot, he told me, he says, look, only eject if the canopy is all blown apart and there's blood all over the place and I'm dead. Then you hit the eject. And I was like, well, I should certainly hope that doesn't happen. And it didn't happen. So, we got back on the ground quite safely after a 1 hour, very interesting 1 hour flight.
What type of maneuvers did you engage in, Greg, when you were on your flight?
Well, during the briefing, the plan was, we're going to go out. We had a box of airspace that was allocated to us over the Straits of Malacca. And the plan was we're going to stay in this box and we're going to do a G warm-up, which will get me ready to do all these cool high G maneuvers like barrel rolls and hard turns and all sorts of stuff, like, breaking a missile lock and that kind of thing. But we got up there, and the first 20 minutes, it was pure bliss, just amazing, great visibility, spectacular experience. And then suddenly I just felt like terrible. I was like a cold sweat. I was feeling a bit nauseous. And I said to the pilot, I said, look, it's really, hot here. He's like, no, it's super cold. And then what had happened was I never even actually made it out of the G warm up to the cool maneuvers. So it hit me pretty hard, those heavy Gs. I mean, the pilot was fine. I mean, he flies these things all the time for the U.S. Navy, but I was feeling pretty rough.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I had maybe a less severe but similar experience. Amazing takeoff. The M-346 just has a beautiful panoramic cockpit in the rear seat because it is meant for an instructor. So you can really see everything that's going on, and beautiful weather that day over Kansas. And much like you, I was having a great time for the first portion. And then a little while in, the same thing happened to me. I started to feel a little bit nauseous, kind of had the same cold sweat that you did. And that was a really eye-opening experience for me, was just how physical the experience was, which I maybe knew intellectually, but you really can't appreciate it until you've been up and felt the strain of the G-force, felt the G-suit, and just felt all of those physical impacts, the nausea, maybe some of the cognitive impacts as well. It was almost like trying to do something while you're feeling sick, and you just know that you're not fully cognitively at your best. And so that portion of the experience really gave me so much respect for the pilots and crew who are in these really stressful situations and having to manage all this information and still fly the aircraft and work the systems while in this, what to me felt like a very degraded physical state.
Yeah, that's the thing. So the pilot with me, he said that it really brought back the enjoyment of flying, because generally he'll be pulling all those Gs, he'll be operating systems, he's doing air-to-air refuelings, they'll be up there for hours. And also at the beginning of it, he has taking off from an aircraft carrier. At the end of it, he has a landing on an aircraft carrier. After that period where we stopped doing the heavy G, that was actually became a more interesting part of the flight, in the sense that we got to really start checking out some of the systems on the aircraft. And the one that really struck me the most was the synthetic aperture radar. I believe that aircraft had the APG-73, which is the old mechanically scanned array radar that's on the Super Hornet. That's since been upgraded to an active electronically scanned array radar, or ASA, which is much better. But we're about 50 nautical miles outside of the Langkawi airfield, which is where the air show is taking place. We point the plane back, or the pilot points it back, and he shines the radar on the flight line, and it's like a black and white picture. I can pick out every single aircraft and identify specific aircraft types from a very great distance away. It's like a black and white picture on my screen. And then like a little crosshair popped up, and he's like, oh yeah, this is how we would use a weapon, for example. If we're going to point a weapon at some aircraft that's on the ramp, this is how they would actually do that. That was really interesting. And then he was also showing me the fly-by-wire system, which was quite fascinating too. So it shows you how all the control surfaces are, working, as you actually, use different controls and so forth. So that was quite interesting too. So we really got a chance to, look at the systems on the aircraft. We didn't get to do a simulated attack on anything, unfortunately. I think your aircraft was a bit better kitted for that simulated virtual combat environment, but still it was a lot of fun to check out the systems.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the aircraft I was on is, because it's a trainer, it has sort of these simulated combat systems where it can replicate having an ASA radar, and which can do air-to-air and air-to-ground combat, and it can simulate weapon systems. The M-346N demonstrator that Textron is now flying in the US is based on the light fighter version of the M-346, so it has hard points for weapons and bombs. And so we did get I did get to demonstrate those, or to witness them. And that was really amazing as well. Similar to what you described, a black and white screen simulating a targeting pod that could show, I think it was an Su-27 that we intercepted at one point and shot down virtually, and also a C-130J that we were able to kind of intercept and visually identify. And then we also did some air-to-ground maneuvers on surface-to-air missile batteries, and that was a really impressive display, I thought, from my pilot QB. He at one point rolled out of a pretty high G turn, or felt high G to me. It was 3.5 or 4 Gs, and was going to use the laser guided air-to-ground option. And something happened, I think, with the sequencing, and the automatic targeting system didn't get a lock, and so he decided to do it manually. And I was nauseous and not quite getting tunnel vision, but I was just sort of along for the ride at that point, as you said, trying not to throw up. And the fact that I was watching him on the screen able to manually target this laser and hold it on the target while also flying the plane all by himself, and he's at least 25 years older than me, was just a really, really impressive display, I thought, of airmanship. And he's just a really experienced pilot. And that was really cool to see. And then he later demonstrated using a JDAM, so GPS guided bomb. And that was a little bit less work for him in the front seat, but just some interesting insights. Like, I didn't know that he had to calibrate the JDAM targeting system by doing a series of turns before he could engage it. So we had to do a couple pretty hard 4G turns so that the JDAM targeting system could kind of get spun up before we could use it. So some really interesting, just little things you learn while doing that, and seeing the techniques in action was really impressive for me. Craig, let's go to you. You've been on a few different flights on some different aircraft. What can you tell us about your experience, and how does that maybe compare to what Greg and I have been through?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for not making me feel like the only lightweight when it comes to G tolerance, because I'm not built to be a fighter pilot. I think from my experiences, I have learned. So that whole sort of anxiety and nausea and stressing about the whole flight experience, I'm glad I'm not the only one who goes through that. So I'd say of the team, I'm the old timer. So I've been reporting since 1996. So a few of my flights are going back a couple of years now. But yes, I mean, the first fast jet ride I ever had, I was incredibly lucky. I got to fly in a Harrier T10 trainer, and this is 2006. So crikey. So I was writing a piece about Joint Force Harrier, which was basically combining Royal Air Force and Royal Navy to fly the Harriers that we had left at that point. And Harrier was just an absolutely awesome aircraft. So we got to fly extremely low and extremely fast, which was just a great experience for me as a first ride. And a real highlight, right at the end of the sortie, I got to hover the jet for like a fraction of a second while the pilot waved his hands so I could see them. And I was incredibly careful not to move any of the controls even a millimeter, because Harrier was a very, very challenging aircraft to fly and way, way, way beyond my capabilities. So yeah, I had a really lucky start there. And then only a year later, I got to ride in the backseat of a Eurofighter Typhoon, which is another real highlight. And we went out over the North Sea to do a 1v1 training flight. And yeah, that was a bit of an eye-opener in terms of, we think of how much G you pull in these aircraft, but a real sort of performance fighter like the Typhoon, the speed at which it can load that G is just spectacular. So we were limited. I think we could only do about 6G maneuvers, and that's about 5 too many for me. So I was happy it wasn't any more than that. But one thing which the Eurofighter has, which I'm sure some of the other newer fighters have as well, has some really good G kit to help the pilot or the pasty passenger in the back of the aircraft in my case. So you have a really good G suit, which helps when you're pulling the G. And also on that aircraft, you have an oxygen overpressure on the mask. So it's pretty much pumping raw oxygen into you to try and keep you conscious. So yeah, that was good. That kept me together without having to go for the bag of shame. Yeah, that was a good experience. But yeah, just thinking at some of the briefing experiences that you were relaying about stressing about the ejection seat. I mean, a couple of the types that I flew, it's an earlier model ejection seat. So you have this little sort of T pin that's in the seat. And while you're strapped in with your visor down, you've got to reach down and try and pull this little pin out and then put it in the canopy rail next to you without dropping it. So that just adds to the whole seat anxiety of, I'm going to drop the pin and then reach down and knock the seat by mistake. Yeah, so beyond that, I've flown 3 different models of Hawk. One of them, showing my age, Canada was the Hawk 115. They've actually retired those aircraft now. So that was obviously a while back I did. Yeah, as you mentioned at the start, Ryan, it's sort of increasingly rare to get flights and things. So, I'm envious of your M-346 N experience. So looking at the current aircraft now and what's coming down the line, you've got Lockheed Martin's F-35, then you go to future with GCAP Tempest or FCAS SCAF and Boeing F-47. They'll all be single-seaters. So increasingly, getting in a simulator is the closest we're going to get to most of these. That's a few of my sort of experiences, but I could go on for hours in other types with helicopters and transport. I think I've flown about 30 types while I've been reporting, so been pretty lucky. So look, as this podcast is a slightly different format to our usual ones, and we're having a bit more fun, I want to fire a quick question at both of you. So have you got 2 or 3 current types that you'd love to add to your logbook if the chance came up? While you have a think about that, I'll give you mine. So Unfortunately, this first one is probably not going to happen because the RAF's retired them now, but I would have loved to have flown in a Tornado. That's the aircraft that I wanted to fly as a pilot when I was a kid. Sadly, it didn't work out that way. Then I think I'd also have my list, I'd have the Saab Gripen, but I want to wait until the F model comes along, which is the two-seater they're building for Brazil at the moment. Fingers crossed that could happen one day, you never know. And I think this one is probably a bit controversial as we're talking fast jets and snazzy trainers, but top of my list, I'd love to fly Apache attack helicopter. So just curious what you'd have on your lists.
I could jump in on that. I think for me, the new F-15EX that Boeing makes would be near the top of the list. I'm assuming only 2-seat models. So obviously some of the really sexy ones like the F-35 or the F-22 are off the list other than a simulator. So I think the F-15EX would be great. That does actually have a second seat in the back that the U.S. Air Force, which is the main customer, hasn't really decided how they're going to use, but Boeing is manufacturing them with 2 seats. So that would be near the top of the list for me. And then probably following in Greg's footsteps, I'd love to fly a Super Hornet, an F-18F. And if I really had my druthers, I'd go off the carrier, which is not an experience I've had other than via helicopter. So I think those would probably be my top 2 if I had to pick. How about you, Greg?
Well, I could think of any number of aircraft I'd like to fly, but if I had to choose 3, I'd love to get a ride in the backseat of an Su-35. Now, I don't know who would take me in an Su-35. I don't know why they'd take me, but since we're kind of like in dreaming mode, that's what I'll go for. Also, I concur. F-15EX would be really cool. Yeah, I'd be curious to see, what the displays are like back there. And I think that's just a really big, powerful fighting machine. So definitely F-15EX. And also, too, the F-16, kind of a classic maneuverable aircraft. And, of course, the seat leans way back and you have that great canopy. So I think F-16 would be pretty cool, too.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the F-16, Greg, because I've flown the F-16 simulator, one of Lockheed Martin's full immersive kind of domed simulators for the F-16. I haven't flown in an actual aircraft. One of the things I was struck by pretty immediately when I got in the M346N and got up in the air was how similar it felt to the simulator that I had flown. And Textron and Leonardo have kind of designed the M346N to use some of the cockpit arrangement of the F-16 since it is a trainer. So it felt really similar to me, both the cockpit itself, but also just looking out the canopy and looking at the ground at, 10, 12,000 feet. I was like, oh, it felt just like the simulator. This was, of course, before any of the nausea and the sweats and the G impacts kicked in. But I was really struck by how well my simulator experience, in fact, did transition to the cockpit in real life. And I was wondering if either of you have had a similar experience.
I had a really wild simulator experience once in Brunei. It was a simulator for a basic trainer. I want to say KT-1. It was unique because a lot of times when you fly in a simulator, the guys that are kind of guiding you ask you to treat it like a real aircraft. But in this specific case, the guys just let me do whatever the heck I liked. And I was like, doing loops over the airfield. And I think I crashed it a few times. And they were just happy as could be to watch me do it. And I've also done some simulators at air shows. I haven't had enough time in them to really get a feel for how that relates to the actual fighter. I've flown an F-35 simulator, but I don't think they're going to let me in an F-35 cockpit anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, for me, I have had the chance to do lots of simulator rides over the years. Among some of the recent ones, I've flown the F-35B simulator a couple of times onto Royal Navy aircraft carrier, and harking back to the Harrier, the flight experience is spectacularly different in the amount of workload that the pilot has to do now is greatly automated. So you kind of sit in a simulator like that and think, hey, yeah, I could probably do this. But I understand that they wouldn't actually put you in the real jet to find out. And the other one that I did, probably one of the most recent ones, I flew the Gripen E simulator at Linköping and got the chance to put the aircraft down on one of the remote airstrips, basically a little bit of highway with a little bit of help from the pilot. But yeah, that was a fairly intense experience, even in simulator guise.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a successful landing in a simulator. I came close at Lockheed Martin's simulation and training center in Orlando with the F-16, but had some improper power management and came up a bit short on the runway and a bit harder than you would want to come into landing. Craig, I wanted to ask you, when you were telling your story about flying in the Harrier in real life, not the simulator, what was it like to experience hovering in a jet? That's obviously a very rare experience, and there's only a handful of aircraft in the world that can do that, with the Harrier being one of them. What was that like?
Yeah, that was a really cool experience, and I was pretty new to reporting that kind of thing at that time. So yeah, you sort of try and get your head around the fact a few minutes ago you were flying, I don't know, 350 knots at a couple of 100 feet, and then you're hovering over the runway. It was a really weird experience. So Harry couldn't hover for terribly long. So, we sat there for, 20 seconds or so. Like I say, the pilot did the literal, you've got it, I've got it, waved his hands in the air and grabbed it again. So I could sort of retire saying I've hovered a Harrier, but it wouldn't have gone very well if he'd not taken the controls back instantly. But yeah, I mean, just a brilliant experience. To have had that as my first ride was pretty special.
Craig, with the Harrier, you mentioned it can't hover for very long. I suppose that's a function of the fuel. Was the fuel really burning low on the gauge when you were doing that, or is it also a function of the engine revs? I mean, what do you mean by that? Like it couldn't hover for long?
So from my understanding, you had to have a supply of water on board the aircraft, I guess for cooling purposes while you were doing the hover, and it didn't carry very much of it. So that's why you couldn't hover for very long. I mean, operationally, they would come back alongside the carrier, match the speed, and then nudge the aircraft across onto the deck. So they would do a little bit longer there. But yeah, I think it was just a physical limit on the aircraft being able to do it.
Speaking of the carrier, this is not a fighter jet question, but Greg, you've had the experience of landing on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, doing a trap landing. What was that like? Could you describe it?
Well, sadly, I wasn't in a fighter when I did that, but I landed on the USS Independence, which, now, as they say, has been converted to razor blades. But I was on a C-2 Greyhound, and, you come in and land, and it's just suddenly, you're facing backwards in the seat. And the G wasn't terribly great. I think, you're sitting backwards, and I remember the tail of the aircraft kind of rising up, and then, it's kind of done, right? It's a very straightforward landing. And then you get out on the carrier deck. But the amazing thing about that experience was, the takeoff. So, you go from 0 to 4 Gs very quickly when you're doing that cat takeoff. And, you have to brace your feet on the seat in front of you and kind of have your hands there. Because otherwise, if you don't brace your feet, your legs will fly up and you'll smash your ankles in the seat. So you really have to be braced when you take off. So the takeoff on a catapult was amazing. That was really intense. Very short, but very, very cool for a moment.
Yeah, what an amazing experience to have had, especially because the Greyhounds are not long for this world. They're in the process of being retired and replaced with the Osprey. So unless the Navy makes a F-18F ride available to one of us, you might be the last one to experience a catapult launch and arresting wire landing on an aircraft carrier.
Well, not only that, when I flew the F-18 at Langkawi, it was media day during my flight. So when we landed, they had about 100 journalists there taking pictures and stuff. And so we lift the canopy up and we taxi to our spot at the apron. And all these photographers come running up, taking pictures and stuff like that. So I really felt like Maverick at the end of Top Gun. It was like I'd won a war or something.
Yeah, I had kind of a similar experience. And mine was a private event, but we did have a photographer that Textron had on station. And yeah, I felt very similar. They gave me the full flight kit with a flight suit, boots, the G suit, obviously, and survival equipment in the case of an ejection. And I felt very much like Maverick walking across the tarmac, and a little bit less like Maverick getting out of the aircraft at the end after hanging on for dear life. It's funny that you mentioned Maverick, because I think one of the kind of iconic things in the Top Gun movie that I really thought was Hollywood was he's kind of known, if you think back to the movie, for he's always taking his oxygen mask off, which I assume is not something that's done in practice for the air crew. But I was really struck in my ride by like how uncomfortable the oxygen mask was. Not that it didn't fit, but it did feel mildly claustrophobic almost. And I'm somebody who I scuba dive, and so I'm used to breathing through a regulator and having something like that providing me oxygen. But I very much related to the fictional character wanting to take the mask off constantly throughout the movie. Did anyone else have an experience like that?
Well, I thought after I landed, I had the mask on the entire time, and I wondered for a while, maybe if I'd taken it off, I would have felt better, but probably it would have made me feel worse. So maybe it was good that I kept the mask on. The thing that struck me was the G suit, which is literally, when you start pulling G, it's like this big python is just kind of squeezing your legs and squeezing your body. And I found that when it starts to activate, I found that a little bit disorientating.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I really was not expecting what that would feel like. Python's a really great analogy. To me, it reminded like when you go and have your blood pressure taken and you just feel that cuff squeezing on your arm really hard when it's at peak inflation, except it's like that for your entire body, really, it feels like, because you have the inflation around your legs and then the actual G-force you feel on your upper body. That was a really intense sensation. How about you, Craig? Did you experience anything like that, either with the oxygen mask or the G suit? Any sensations that really stood out to you from your various rides?
Yeah, I mean, I think the mask is a bit uncomfortable, and I broke my nose when I was much younger, and that sort of has an impact on it. But no, and I couldn't have the thing tight enough, giving me enough oxygen. To be honest, I'd have taken all they could have given me. And like I said, with flying, the G kit really, really helps you to just stay conscious and not feel too bad. So no, I was more than happy to put up with any discomfort from wearing anything. It's quite often, if you end up with one where you have to wear an immersion suit as well, that's really tight and sweaty and uncomfortable. That's more usually with helicopters. But ultimately it's there to, it's there to help you and save your life. So, I would not turn down any of the equipment.
All right. So I think here will be our final question for the podcast, because I bet if you're like me, and you probably are, you maybe when you were younger were interested in flying or becoming a fighter pilot, and maybe that's what led you to our line of work as aviation journalists. So knowing what you know now and what it feels like to be in the cockpit and everything that's involved, if you could go back or were offered the opportunity to fly, would you take it and become a fighter pilot?
So for me, I would make an awesome helicopter pilot. I'm quite happy flying along there, low to the ground, not too fast, and just sort of keeping as near 1G as I possibly can. I don't have the physical ability to be pulling lots of G. And I know it's one of those things, the more trained you are, the more you do it, the more you'll get used to it. But I don't think I would in any way ever have cut it as a fighter pilot, no.
Wow, given the chance to do it again, would I become a fighter pilot? Assuming that I was capable of being a fighter pilot, I think it'd be a really fun gig. But, again, it's a lot of work. I mean, you really have to be quite good at school. You have to be physically adept. There's a huge process to weed guys out. But would I do it? Yeah, I think if I could make the cut, I'd certainly like to try, because it's, I love airplanes, and fighter planes are the best.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Greg. It was definitely a humbling experience. I always thought that was something I would have been very well suited for and would have really enjoyed. Like, it'd be maybe the most fun job in the world. And after my experience, I definitely pulled back on that a little bit. And I was like, oh, this is obviously a very, as you mentioned, academically challenging job and competitive field to get into, but really extremely physically demanding in a way that I wasn't expecting. And it definitely made me reconsider if it would have been the best thing for me to do and how well I would have done at it. So I'm really fortunate to have had the experience, and I'm glad to have been able to share it with you all, and really happy to hear about your experiences as well. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. It's been a really fun chat. Thanks for speaking with me today, guys, and we'll talk again soon.
Great chatting with you guys again, and congratulations on the big Defense Media Awards.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's great having you as wingman.
Never leave your wingman, as they say. Thanks both. Just as a reminder to everyone listening, you can find our reporting on the M346N demonstration flight in today's show notes. You've been listening to Flight Global Focus, which is a production of Flight Global with audio editing by Lucy Johnson. If you want to get in touch with us or find out about commercial opportunities related to the podcast, please email podcast@flightglobal.com. Listen, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Ryan Finnerty, and we'll see you next time for Flight Global Focus.